Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Phoenix, Arizona, it's time for Phoenix Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Hello and welcome to Phoenix Business Radio, broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studio inside Max 6 Conscious Workspace in Tempe, Arizona, where we help build businesses and connect you with the right people. I'm your host and Phoenix Business RadioX studio owner, Karen Nowicki, and we have a full house today. It's been a long haul with this pandemic most of the time, at least the first couple of months. Everybody was coming in remotely, and I sat in the studio all by myself. And little by little, people have been coming back in, and we're still maintaining social distance when we're in the co-work space. So it feels good to have people directly in front of me, especially our friends who travel down from Sedona every time we do this segment. Camilla Ross, I want to thank you with Emerson Theater Collaborative for making the trip as often as you can.
It's a privilege to be able to be here, so thank you so much.
And we have you to thank. You've been a partner of mine and Karen Loomis's from the very beginning of this conversation around small business and the arts.
How can we say no? We have to talk about things. It's really, really important. Conversation is what heals.
It does. I'm pulling this on you without any prompting. Since we've been doing this, what in this series have you discovered about yourself and about this whole conversation around racism?
I discovered how much more I have to learn. You know, we have so much more that we can learn from other people, and how important it is. Culture is a beautiful thing. And so when our hearts are open, we can better understand one another, having that conversation.
For sure. And with us again is Karen Loomis, who we have to thank for this opportunity. She came to me, and I know if you've listened to our previous shows before, she came to me with the idea that we do one episode, one conversation, which I was happy to do. And the three of us said, oh my goodness, we're really onto something here. And to Camilla's point, learning so much about ourselves, about how we interact, and the level of responsibility that we have with each other. Karen Loomis with No Moss Brands, welcome back to the studio.
Thank you, Karen. I'm happy to be here and have these difficult conversations. And if there's one thing that I know about myself is that I like to talk. So here we are.
Was that new to you?
Not really.
It's not new to me.
No, but when you put a microphone in front, man,
it's cool, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't it?
And I want to thank you. You've been doing some beautiful videos. Again, challenging and encouraging and loving on people with the strength and the perseverance that you demonstrate around this topic. And you've just been a great cheerleader. And Karen's been responsible for all the graphics and the social media and all that. She just hands it to my team and they run with it. But holy cow, you are a force to be reckoned with. You're amazing.
She's a powerhouse.
Thank you. And I'll ask the same thing of you. Is there something that you've noticed upon reflection with this series, either personally, professionally, or even around the level of responsibility as it relates to racism?
Yeah, it's a lot. First off, I will just say that there's been so much that I didn't know. And I know that that's probably really hard for people who are saying, how do you not know these things? You're Black and living it. And part of the reason is that's exactly it. We're Black and living it. We're just trying to get through the day somewhat like you are. And so we're not thinking about the history of our people any more than you are. But it doesn't give you a right to not to know these things. And that's what I want you to just think about and take home is the world is more than just you. And you have to take that opportunity to learn about things that maybe you thought you knew, but maybe there's a chance that what you were taught was not exactly 100% accurate.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. Karen and Camilla, would either of you like to kind of present the topic today, and then we'll introduce Josh and Rose?
Wow. This is kind of a deep one for me because it touches me. Suicide, the silent killer. I know that in the African-American community that this is a conversation that we as a people must have because it does impact our communities very much so. And so I really want to just extend an arm and a privilege and a welcome to Joshua Rivedal because he's not only lived it, but he provides this solution, if you will, and this conversation to make it better understood by people. And the humility that he brings to the conversation is extraordinary. And so without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome Joshua Rivedal. So speak, my brother.
Thank you. I would have preferred a little more ado, actually. Like that was, the ado was going well. I was like, keep talking. That sounded really nice.
You're like, give me in there, do.
What do you mean about no further ado?
I like a do.
Oh, man. I gotta say, I'm super privileged to be in this space, in this room, for a variety of reasons. And I could probably talk for 15 minutes about my gratitude, being able to take a plane here from Philadelphia in the middle of a pandemic and being healthy and safe. And so that for one, but also the fact that I have brushed against suicide and I'm still here. And, you know, my grandfather died by suicide in 1966 and my father died by suicide in 2009. And I nearly died by suicide in 2011. And so I'm here and really wanting to repackage that pain and that difficulty to present it to the world as a gift, not because I need to be that person, but because
you need to be that person.
But I need to be that person. Well, I feel like, you know, I'm more than willing to sit in the background and be a writer, be a performer, but I can't do that because there's too many people suffering. And so I do work in suicide prevention. And this is the mindset that I want to bring to the table, because sometimes I'll get that one person who'll say, well, who are you to tell somebody that they can't die? Like, I'm not that person, but I'll tell you what I'm in? I'm not in suicide prevention. I'm in suffering prevention, because it gets to the point where somebody is feeling so hopeless that they feel like they have no other choice but to die. And that's their coping mechanism. And so I want to take that off of the table, because that's been on the table for me at one point in my life. And that is the darkest, worst place. Wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. And I've been through difficult things. And so there's also some gratitude there that I now have transferable skills to take to COVID-19 and take to the divorce a couple years ago and take to the homicide a couple years ago, and to say, you know what, I can make it through. It's going to be hard. And even now, there's a couple days a week where I have this malaise. I'm like, why am I waking? Oh, yeah, that's right. The world we live in, right? But 10 years ago, I would have been on my back 7 days a week. So just want to express that gratitude. And also to Camilla for believing in my work and what I do and what we do, because at some point, my work becomes we. And so we're bringing it to Sedona. We collaborated back in Connecticut 7 years ago. 2013, I Am Worthy Project, and you found me on Twitter. Actually, yeah, the early 2000s Craigslist. It worked out well, but we ended up collaborating and just really staying in touch. And you know, the ties that bind are there. And we went a few years without chatting, and then Camilla made it into one of my books as well. Her story of perseverance was really incredible. Into the Impossible Project. And so we're here in Sedona this week, and we're going to be doing some suicide prevention work combined with a one-person show that I perform. And
we open tonight. So really, really nice.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday, show dates.
And we'll be streaming it as well. There'll be a really brilliant gentleman who's live streaming for us, and his tech is so good. And so if you can't be with us in person, it's 25% capacity. Would love to see your face if you can make it. But if not, we're certainly live streaming it. And that's exciting. That's a sort of a Brave New World kind of a thing.
For all of us.
For all of
yeah,
us.
Very good. Oh, my goodness. Well, I can't wait to hear more from you. And Camilla, I would love for you to introduce Rose as well.
Good morning, Rose Boerner from NAMI Sedona. Thank you so much for being here. Can you please tell us about you, why you're here?
And the work you do.
And the work, yes.
Sure, yes. My name is Rose Boerner, and I'm the president of NAMI Sedona, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And I came to Sedona to retire about 17 years ago, and I got involved with NAMI right from the beginning. So I'm still in the same position, doing the same thing, even though I'm retired. But So I've come across many, many families through the years since I facilitate NAMI family support group meetings to offer support and education and information to family members. And I've heard so many times when our people that I've known so well have lost a loved one to suicide. And it's just such a devastating event for families to go through. For the people who are left behind, it's really, really sad too. So I'm so glad that Camilla and Josh are doing this play, Kicking My Blue Jeans in the Butt, because this is the kind of event that we need here in the community to raise awareness about suicide. We want to erase the stigma around suicide. It should be talked about just like any other illness. So I'm really looking forward to being being a participant at the show, at the play. We're going to be NAMI and the Mental Health Coalition will be doing the Q&A at the end of the play. I also have people from Spectrum Healthcare, who's the provider of treatment for people with mental health issues. And they're going to have 3 of their staff present each night at the play in case somebody really needed to have, more professional help after the play. So anyway, thank you so much to Josh and Camilla and to both you, Karen, and other Karen.
You can just call us Karen.
Karen squared.
Giving us this opportunity to be able to talk about this.
Our pleasure. It's funny, for the length that we've been doing this series, it's also the length of time that I've been aware that everyone's given Karens a smackdown. Right? So we've had some fun joking about that. Have you seen those silly memes about the typical Karen? Well, we both feel like, yeah, that's us and we're proud of it. I would love to share, if I can, and I'm not sure if Josh and Rose know this, maybe you two have shared with them about my personal story recently, and I'm emotional. Some days I can get through this without feeling every bit of emotion, and other days I can't. Today appears to be one of those days. Back in October 2019, so just 11 months ago, my husband attempted suicide and survived, was in TQ for a month and then a post-acute facility for a month after that. And we are currently working our way through a divorce. It's not what either of us wanted, but the circumstances have brought us to this situation. And this conversation around mental health, self-care, suicide prevention is everything to me right now. Everything. You talked about, those moments that you wake up and you feel like you've got it going on. And then every once in a while, bam, you're like, what's this malaise? What is going, why do I feel off? And I'm just now coming out of almost 9 months of this dark, heavy time.
Mm-hmm. But the grace with which you've done it has been, I know that's not what you were trying to achieve at all. I know you were trying to achieve your own mental health, and it was helpful for you, but it was also helpful for us that are friends with you to walk that path with you so that we could know how to be there for you and what are you experiencing. And also your ability, what I'm talking about for the listener is that Karen, for the first 30, 45 days, really gave the social media friends a good idea of what was going on medically with her husband. And that's just not ever done. And the fact that she did share that with us tells you a lot about her. And it also was very helpful for me as her friend to really be there for her from afar. And so that I could be there for her when she was ready to be, to be face to face. And that's just, here's the importance of this radio show is if she wouldn't have had the outlet of social media to talk about it, what would that have done to her own mental health as somebody who's going through what she doesn't need to do that. For her, doing it alone was not her option.
And I want to be really clear when you share that I've owned a social media company. I'm an integrative coach. I've done my work around self-care, shadow work, trauma work. I guide other people through the same process. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. My work will never be done. I'll always be on this trajectory to evolve and come to find myself, to know myself better. social media isn't always the best outlet for people to share when they're hurting. So I just want to kind of put a little bookmark on that. I chose to do it as a way to heal and to express the pain and the just the depth of despair that I was experiencing as a loved one and family member for Mike. And while I shared the story about, where we were at with him medically so that people could pray and think about him and hold intention and space for him and love on us to get us through to where we could survive. And we did that beautifully. It wasn't easy. And I don't recommend that is the way that people handle it unless you're ready to handle that, because it's very public, it's very open. Most of my storytelling was around what I was going through. So anyway, I just wanted to share that because this is a really real conversation. Each of us have been touched in some way by mental health issues and or suicide. And Josh, the work that you're doing, I applaud you and I thank you for that. I can't wait to learn more. That's really the gist of what I wanted to say and share. I'll kind of fade to the background, but I would love to open it up. Rose, you had mentioned, obviously you've been in this field and supporting families for quite some time. I would love to hear from you. Have you noticed that there's been an increase in people's, I'll use the word desperation, level of desperation, given what's going on in the political climate, the social climate, as well as now COVID and the quarantine?
Yes, definitely. It has had a big impact. The COVID especially, because so many people being out of work, increased the domestic violence. It has had a lot of impact on people, definitely, especially millennials.
Absolutely.
I had some figures here that they said, it has increased depression and anxiety in people. Between June and July of this year, the risk of depression a staggering 31%. And millennials are among most emotionally vulnerable organisms in the COVID-19 era. So this age group has a 305% risk of depression, higher risk of depression, more than their say the baby boomers, people over 60. It's really affecting that age group.
And I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I was just having this conversation the other day. As it relates to social media, there are studies that show, and maybe Rose, you're familiar, or Josh, familiar with this, that the rise in depression and suicide has risen in direct correlation with the availability of social media. Which is fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's the comparison or the grass is always greener, or I get to tell the world how I'm feeling, but try to work it out through these people that are talking to me on the other end of the screen. Who knows what it is? I have a 13-year-old and two mid-20-year-olds, and it is a very different world for these kids out there right now.
Yes,
very different. So let's just open it up to Josh. If you'd be willing to share a little bit about your background. You alluded to it and mentioned that your family has dealt with suicide as well, and you yourself have struggled. Would you be willing to share a little bit more about that story, and then tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing now?
For sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. So there's a history of mental illness in my family, and I didn't really find this out until a couple of years ago. Like, I didn't even know. And I've been doing this work for almost 9 years. And I found out that my grandfather had latent schizophrenia and I believe bipolar as well. And then his daughter, my aunt, who I never met, she died before I was born. She lived with some specific mental illnesses. And then I would assume my dad did as well. He went undiagnosed. He probably was living with narcissistic personality disorder, probably bipolar, probably some form of depression. So I live with depression and anxiety as well. And I can remember having symptoms as young as 8 of these things, but not getting a diagnosis till 28 because you don't talk about these things from where I come from, like a very religious community, a very homogenized community. To a degree, not entirely, homogenized way of thinking rather than, because I did grow up in a very diverse, with a lot of different ethnic backgrounds. But that being said, so there was the presence of suicide was very apparent in my life from a very young age because I knew there was something off. Like, all my grandparents passed before I was born, and I never got a straight answer about my grandfather. And like, how this guy died from shrapnel 17 years after the war ended. Like, that's not possible, dog. I don't know what your dad what. And And I was little, but I wasn't dumb, and so that was interesting. And I just remember but personally also experiencing, my dad was also very abusive emotionally and physically. I found out several years ago, doing some community counseling work, that is one of the a detrimental component to my own mental health and wellness, that people who experience abuse as their brain is still developing will, and so I was like, why do people say that I'm bad? Like, why? I'm just trying to live. Like, I don't understand. And so it manifests itself in my behavior and my way of thinking. And I can see it playing out in the relationships that I chose as an older person, and the substances I got into, which never was like, I never like fell asleep naked under a bridge, but I had a hard time with certain things, for a little while. Like, I was abusing certain things. And so I wasn't, so all that being said, fast forward, like when you get to a place where you feel a sense of hopelessness and all are detrimental and or unhealthy coping mechanisms, that's where you're going to turn, and or you're going to turn to a coping mechanism that you've seen in your life before. And for me, that was suicide, because that was now a learned behavior. And so
even though it's to some degree it was unspoken,
very
it
much
still energetically runs through the fiber and the fabric of your family.
Mm-hmm. That intergenerational trauma will last 6 generations. I have nieces and nephews whose great grandfather died by suicide, and I'm gonna probably hopefully know their kids as well, and so their kids, the great grandfather, and they're gonna be very aware of that. And if I'm around, they're going to be aware of it, because we need to be having these conversations. So the intergenerational trauma, it used to be, well, it just affects the immediate family. No, it affects 6 down at least, and it affects like a big web of people. So my dad died 11 years ago. My whole family, we were just in trauma and chaos, lawsuit, lying, different things. And we didn't come together as a family one bit. And that was our own different ways of grieving and the experience of trauma. And so 2 years after I lost my dad, I was in suicidal crisis. A lot of major change happening all at one time. My 2 illnesses were out of control because they were undiagnosed. And I started thinking that the world would be better off if I weren't in it. And that's not true. Now, we talk about backaches and knee aches. I was having a psych ache. Yeah. Truly was. Mm-hmm. And we don't frame it that way. Right. Your brain is an organ, your heart is an organ, your pancreas is an organ, and yet we treat the brain so much differently than we do everything below the neck. And that's, I want to normalize making that difference. So since being in recovery starting in 2011, I realized, through therapy and counseling and all these different things, that I needed to sort of like learn how to walk again to truly recover. And so part of that, there was this happy accident where I found that by helping other people, this elderly woman in and out of my building in Harlem in New York City, that for a few moments I would feel better. And I was like, that feels good. Like, how do I keep that going? So I wanted to help other people. So part of my journey back to the land of the living was to feel whole again. I needed to be in the service of other people, because prior to that, I was a professional actor, and I still am from time to time, but a professional actor, playwright. And it was all about me and what I could get and how far I could climb up the ladder without really giving too much thought about other people. And so now that script is flipped. So at this point, I've given over 400 presentations in 4 countries, 7 books, curriculum, journal papers, and it's like the trajectory of the survivor of suicide loss, the art of living with chronic illness, and surviving trauma and living with trauma. Those are the 3 papers that I'm a co-author on. And the I'm Possible Project are other people's stories of overcoming traumatic incidents and overcoming. We just had a book come out yesterday, actually, Lemonade Stand Volume 3, and it's all people with, overcoming post-traumatic stress and things like that. And so I think where I'm at in my journey and with this work is I'm continuing to do the same stuff, the one-man show plus the prevention. I'm kind of moving into stand-up and pairing that with this work as well. But what I'm starting to see, and I'm so glad that you all brought me in on this conversation, because I have a real passion for bringing this upstream, right? Like, so when we talk about it, now people are more willing to talk about it and have me in middle and high schools and stuff like that. But what bothers me is that, so you want the quick fix, and you want to say, this is how you prevent. We're going to give you a day and a month and maybe a week. Right? Sound familiar?
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. Okay,
the shortest month y'all get. The shortest month. 28 days.
For real, look.
Leap years are a beautiful thing.
Well, we got Black History Month, 1 month.
That's what I'm saying. You get the shortest month. Like, they couldn't make it like
Can we get a whole year?
The 32nd of January.
Okay, 365.
But, So it bothers me that they want that. So, because if we're going to talk about suicide prevention, we got to talk about food insecurity. We got to talk about homelessness. We've got to talk about education. We've got to talk about prison reform. We've got to talk about racism. We got to talk about trauma, and we got to do it now. And we got to stop pushing it on other people. And we got to be willing to have critical thinking conversations and empathy. And so I'm talking about this. Like, I'm, not to pat myself on the back. I'm not going to talk about all the things I do, but I volunteer as part of my democratic duty and as part of my humanity. So put your money where your mouth is. So I'm volunteering for a food insecurity organization and for a foster care organization, because if I'm out doing this work and I'm not doing the other work, I'm a hypocrite, Right.
Yeah. But here's the thing. All lives matter, right?
All birthdays matter on your birthday, too.
So on this all lives matter thing, if all lives did matter, would there be homelessness? Okay?
Right.
Would there be hungry people? So don't give me that all lives matter, okay? Because they're not doing the work that needs to be done in our communities. And if we're not doing that work and we're not asking the questions and we're not being neighborly, what does that say to us as a people?
Well, the problem I found in the circles that I tend to run, and I love my dear friends and family, but I see that people say all their argument is all lives don't matter, because if you don't have the same faith, or if you don't live in the same neighborhood, or have the same zip code, or have the same dollar amount, poo on you. That's not on me. That's on you. So,
that's because we're lazy, right?
Let's keep whatever it is. And yet those same folks will say they're all around giving back and living from a place of gratitude and service. Right. And there's this disconnect. Rose, you're at a disadvantage being not in the studio with us. That's not on you. That's not on you. That's of course just the nature of how this goes. I would love for you to speak up and share, and feel free to interrupt us. And if you could, from what Josh just shared and just the moment in time that we're pausing in, what can you offer us in your experience, and what are some of the resources that we might have available to help people?
As far as resources, I sent a big list to Karen the other couple of days ago. We just created a website of mental health resources with related support services for people all over Arizona in each county. So there's over 1,000 resources right there. So that's our most current source of information for that. But also, NAMI provides a lot of programs throughout the year. We have a family-to-family program that teaches families how to cope with all the different types of mental illnesses. Well, now we want to call them mental health conditions, really. They're all brain disorders. I mean, they're brain disorders. It should not be treated any differently than any medical condition. And this is something we've been fighting for years, to get people and the insurance companies to treat mental health conditions just the same as others. There shouldn't be any difference. It just happens to affect the brain. But I think the impact of suicide on both on the individuals and the community is so great. For example, 75% of all people who die by suicide are male. And although more women than men attempt suicide, men are nearly 4 times more likely to die by suicide. Wow. So, and then in the community impacts, it's most of the time is the second leading cause of death for American Indian, Alaska Natives between the ages of 10 and 34. And it's also the second leading cause for African Americans and for Hispanic people. And it's the leading cause of death for Asian Americans. These are all in the ages of 15 to 34 or so.
Wow.
So, and it just affects everybody in the community. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than straight youth. Transgender people are 12 times more likely to attempt suicide. And 10% of young adults say they experienced suicidal thoughts in the past year. I know that technology, as good as so many advantages it's given us, but it also has created this social media, like you were saying, Karen. it's created a monster. Kids are experiencing cyberbullying, with technology, and parents. I think it's the families need to get involved in how they talk to their kids and how they explain, the mental health facts, that everything can impact your mental health. This being National Suicide Prevention Month is a really good time to have these kinds of conversations. And what we offer at NAMI is just mainly, support for families, mainly the feeling that you're not alone. There's so many people going through what you're going through. And 1 in 4 families are affected by mental illness. If you start talking to people, people who have never said a word about knowing someone or even having somebody close in their family who had experienced some mental health issues, if you start the conversation, they all start talking.
Absolutely.
They all say, "Oh yes, I know someone." And this has been so silent for so many years, but now it's becoming more and more open. And I really admire you, Josh, for being so open about what you've gone through and with your family. I experienced that in my family myself. I have an adult son who has a mental health condition, and we've been dealing with that for many years. So I know what it's like firsthand, and I've known so many other people also as well. And it is very difficult to go through when you don't have the support of the medical community, your government. The mental health system has really broken down in many places.
I would love to speak to that. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and the prisons have become the mental health treatment centers for so many people. So, that needs to change. Anyway,
yeah,
I think
we've got some work to do.
We really have a lot of work to do. The prisons have become the place for that, which they're not equipped. And the schools have become a place for that. They're not equipped, and there's some resistance to equip. When Mike was in the hospital, the next place after trauma intensive care unit was a post-acute facility. But given the fact that we are self-insured through the Affordable Health Care Act, we were denied any health insurance coverage because it was a suicide attempt. So every day that he sat in TQ, and I had that weighing heavy on me. How are we ever going to get through these bills for a full month? And he had to be in trauma intensive care unit because he had a gunshot wound to his head. He had a tracheotomy, simply trying to save his life physically. We couldn't even begin to talk and look at what's going on mentally or brain trauma as a result of the incident. So when it was time for them to say, "Listen, we've saved his life. He's doing great," and getting ready to now go to a post-acute facility, I had to, with the help of gracious friends and family, raise $20,000 so that somebody would even accept him into a post-acute facility. But the difficulty for us was I could not afford a place, and nor did anybody accept him that could deal with both the mental health and wellness and the physical recovery. So I was encouraged by the, hospital liaison who was there to support me in this journey. We decided that we first had to get him into a post-acute facility to make sure that he could, learn to speak again, walking clearly, had motor functions, and he's done, he's an amazing human being, and he's done amazingly well. It's phenomenal. But that was 2 months without any psychological or mental health support. And when it came time to leave the post-acute facility, they handed me these resources. And to Rose's point, thousands of resources are available. But when you're in crisis and I've got money issues, I've got a 13-year-old at home, I own my own business, my husband has just attempted to end his life, I'm completely out of my mind. I don't know how to navigate those resources. And nor did I have any help. Maybe I was just, at the hands or the feet of the wrong people. But my point being, the resources are there, and thank God, But it's got to be preventative, which is the work that Rose is doing with families. It's the work that Josh is doing through his work. It's why I'm being so vocal about my own journey. We've got to make self-care
a priority,
top priority. And sure, that might look like going to the gym for you. It might look like getting your nails done. It might look like, sleeping in on Saturday. All that is great. But if you do not deal with your trauma, and heal it and reintegrate it, we're going to continue to see this. And for those of our listeners who are business owners and executive leaders for corporations, small businesses, and enterprises, I'm speaking directly to you. It is, I believe, as a former educator and an educator around these topics, we've got to have trauma-informed workplaces because, as I've just described, I could barely show up and get out of bed every single day for 2 months. And I was just a casualty of someone who was in a far darker place.
Absolutely.
And someone who I love with my whole heart and had no clue that he was traveling this road. There were, I look back now and there were indications, but I had no clue at the time. And I'm in the field. Yes, I own and operate Business RadioX, but I'm also an integrative coach professional, a shadow coach and a trauma guide and healing guide. So I am aware, and it was lost on me.
It's within communities. And when you're looking at a community of people, you have to look at their surroundings and their space. And so as community, we really need to be out there, upfront and personal, having those conversations with your neighbor. Who's your neighbor? Everyone is your neighbor. And so we all have a responsibility as people to make sure that those within our circle and without our circle are cared for. And through any medium, if you're hungry, if you're unemployed, if your children are hungry, if those basic living things that people need, if they're not provided for, that's just the beginning of the catalyst for that to go the way it's going to go. So we have a duty and obligation as people to care for one another.
But I also think, I think about as a single woman, men have come and gone in my life for various assortment of reasons. But during that time, mostly who I've dated have been white men. And I'm not trying to do anything more than kind of talk about the statistics of this. I've had more than one of them say, well, if then I'm just going to kill myself. How in the world, as an individual, do you respond to somebody? Because I think this is real world help. How do you respond to somebody like that? Because in my mind, I go like, well, is this an attention plea? Is it what? Am I supposed to take this serious? Am I just supposed to ignore you and pretend you never said that? I mean, how do you know what option you should go by? I mean, I've seen it all, and my reaction to it is I just pretend that they didn't say that, which is absolutely the last thing you should do. But I think that if you look at things like that, it's all of us in our individual life, to what Camila said, there are all these little things that happen, these moments where you're like, there's got to be a better reaction than, you either kill yourself or move out. Let me choose one of those two. I mean, these are just totally, how do you react to that? Like I said, well, maybe you should just move out.
Yeah, Josh, then Rose, I'd love to hear your response to that.
Yeah, I think you were asking a rhetorical question, but I'm gonna answer it anyway. I would approach that in a couple of different ways. First, I would want to sit there and unwrap that with them, because if again they say, oh, that was just a throwaway phrase. Well, and without judgment, and tone of voice is really hard. But where did you learn to approach a problem that way? How did you, and just start asking open-ended questions and unwrapping where they learned that from and why they would say that, and if that has ever crossed their mind before, and just really going down that rabbit hole. On the other hand, you as the partner, the spouse, the significant other, that's technically we're not responsible for anybody but ourselves, truly, to a degree. Maybe their emotions and things like that. I mean, I do believe that we are in part responsible for each other, but at that point, you can't take care of somebody who doesn't want to be taken care of, right? So on the other hand, it's not your job to be their therapist or their, their everything. So they need to also, be checking in, and men as a stereotype typically are not good, are not, it's not normalized. It's not we don't have, as men, we don't have a lot of male role models who are willing to model that behavior of checking in with other men and being vulnerable and speaking. We're getting better at that. But I think that specifically, I would instead of avoiding, and I know there's no commentary on your personal.
No, I avoid a lot of things,
as do we all. I mean, there's as do we. No, seriously, truly. Yeah. But instead of avoiding that particular conversation, I would then unwrap that and ask a lot of questions and see where they're,
Absolutely.
where that, because we just can't avoid that, and that's the difficult thing, because the other thing that's been normalized in our society is that suicide. I don't know if it's our way of dealing with it and not dealing with it, but either you're a pariah or you're a joke. So why is there suicide buffalo sauce? As if like the amount of chili peppers in that sauce is akin to anything like being in the emotional pain of wanting to die. Or why are we running suicide sprints? Why do I hear this conditional phrase, if this happens, then I'm going to do this. If she breaks up with me, I'm going to kill myself. Oh, boom. You can't see me but you put your fingers to your head as if you're going to shoot yourself in the head. Like you had a bad experience in the office today. You're like, Trish was talking real crappy again. Like that's not okay.
I actually did it in TQ. I walked up to the nurse's station. I think Mike's 2 weeks into Mike being there, and I can't remember what the situation is, but I remember being so embarrassed that I had done that motion, and here we are for that reason. Yeah. I had done that motion in a comment to say so flippantly, and I just was aware of it. It would have been lost on everybody because not we all, but many people do it. And I just started bawling, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've trivialized this. Yeah. And my young son, my 13-year-old, who, when he was first got his phone a year ago, was talking, the girls in the class and the boys in the class, and now we get to be on, texting and social media, whatever, and mom's monitoring every word for the first couple of years. But sure enough, a little girl shows up on his conversation, and she's trying to get him to verify her being. Yeah. Like, do you think I'm pretty? And I heard, just asking those questions. And I thought, oh my gosh, this poor young lady. And at one point, she was saying that she was in trouble emotionally and mentally, and that she was suicidal. Well, of course, I called the school and I said, listen, this is between my son and this girl, but somebody needs to know. And they were very grateful. They got in touch with the parents and everything. And it ended up not being that they knew that, I was the one who kind of prompted it, but we make it, we've just gotten, I don't know. Rose, what are your thoughts? And Josh, I apologize for cutting you off, but I so get what you're sharing. Let's have Rose speak, and then I want to come back to you as well with how, again, let's focus this last 15 minutes on prevention.
Right. Touching on what you were just saying, Karen, about children and all the pressures they have nowadays. Also, social media, of course, has really contributed to that. But and this can have any adverse childhood experience can have such a lifelong impact later on in life. They did that. I don't know if you heard of the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, where just a list of 10 questions that you ask people. What adverse experience they experience. The more that you have from 1 to 10, it correlates to what happens later on in life. They can have many medical conditions, even they can have mental health conditions, and it's all related to what they went through as children. So it's so important now for people when somebody is in a crisis or is having problems with mental health issues, they should they need to go back. Therapists should be asking the question, what happened to you, more than what's going on in your life right now, but find out what happened to you in the past. That's what really the key is.
And healing that trauma.
This, yeah.
I love that.
I'd also assert, given that I'm a certified trauma guide, I would also assert that it's not only the question, what happened to you when you were a child, but when we are in trauma, whether it's repeated trauma over a period of time or it's a one event, it's all relative, right? So my trauma is different than, Josh's trauma and so on. It could be as simple as a third grade teacher looking at you the wrong way when you walked in the door and saying something negative about you in front of the class. That shock hits your body. It lands in your body, it stays there, it lives there, and it may be dormant for years until something triggers it, right? And that's one example. But that shock and impact from that experience that some of us might trivialize and say, oh no, the kid goes home and tells mom and dad says, oh, that's no big deal. Get over it, right? Okay, well, easier said than done. Now that shock lives in the body and our mind. The way in which our brain works when that trauma hits our body, we do not think clearly any longer. We go into flight or fright. Was that the right term? And we process trauma differently. And so until we can work with the therapist, the counselor, the trauma guide, whoever it is that will help us bring intention to the trauma points in our life in 3 different places, our mind, as well as our body and our spirit, through some work, asking the question, what happened in your childhood? That's a great question to ask. But if we unzip people and we leave them unzipped and don't know how to help them integrate, we're not helping any. I've got a friend here at Max 6 who's telling his story about a traumatic experience and was suicidal after the event. And the experience that he had, they left him unzipped. It was supposed to be a man's weekend. Get over it. Let's, kind of militant, survival thing. They left him unzipped and did not know how to help him zip back up.
I want to say this, so can you imagine the African-American community and the trauma that we as a people have experienced for decades?
400 years.
Decades upon decades upon decades. So you imagine that type of trauma, okay, and the response that is put out by white America in so many instances about that.
It didn't happen to you. You weren't a slave.
Right. Okay? That is trauma upon generations that filter down through the DNA, one after another. And you're going to tell me that racism is not an issue in Black America in respect to trauma and suicide prevention? Get away from me with that mess.
But here's something interesting I just wanted to add, and then we'll get back to you, Josh, because we keep saying we're getting back to you and we don't.
For real, though.
I saw an interesting study, and I'll put the information in, and it was about sleep. And I think Karen can relate to this, because if I remember one of your posts talking about sleep leading up to Mike's event, here's what the study basically said. The study basically said that it's showing that lack of sleep, that trauma, that stress from lack of sleep drives people more so to make these decisions that aren't the right decisions. And that African Americans over decades, and like Camilla's saying, sleep has not been our friend. And sleep is not a friend of an African American, primarily because if you just think about what Camilla just said about the ongoing trauma, the worrying about, for example, my good neighbor's getting ready to sell his house. Who's going to move in? What is, our houses are close enough in this state that it's important that you have a neighbor whose garage opens up, to your garage. You want to make sure you don't have somebody who is not exactly a good player when it comes to the community. I mean, so that's just an example. But sleep, I'll post this study, and I'll post a lot of the resources that Rose was talking about on the No Moss brand Facebook page and LinkedIn as well. But the sleep, it's such a simple thing to watch. But I also, when I'm saying this, I also giggle and laugh because I think, sleep, what's that? I mean, there's so many things that take away sleep. And that's the life that Josh is referencing. It's just all these things add up. And then you try to sleep to repair and you can't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think, all right, so think about this. We've recently been, as a society, been like, bullying is bad. We can't bullying. And we know more and more that bullying brings about suicidal ideation attempts and suicide deaths. So think about cultural bullying. Think about the cultural oppression that has. I'm so glad you brought this up, Camilla, about racism and suicide. I was reading a study this morning about how racism definitely affects suicide ideation and it affects attempts in Black and brown communities.
That's right.
And so, so where's trauma? Like stealing of Black wealth. Look up redlining. Look up A Case for Reparations by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Look up, if you don't believe in intergenerational trauma, look at the daughters and sons and grandsons of Holocaust survivors. Mm-hmm. Look at that. Let's talk about that. So we need to open up our minds and listen to people when they say, like, I'm having trouble, I'm having a difficult time, this is traumatic. And then what can we do to make change? What can we do to move our feet and to make things a little different or a little better? And the first step is education. I got a chance to positively affect a young man who's the son of some friends of mine. And he lives in the middle of America, and he was having a difficult time coping with all these different voices. And he's like, I want to march, I want to protest, but my parents won't let me because COVID and this and that. And I was like, well, what about volunteering? And he's like, I don't know. And so it was one of those like typical 15-year-old things. But then we started talking. And I was like, well, the best thing you can do right now is educate yourself. So when your redneck friends have this and that to say, then you don't have to get angry. You can present facts. And so I presented him with the Coates article from The Atlantic. And then we were hanging out like later in the week because I spent a week with his family. And he started asking me, he's like, so Josh, does the Federal Housing Administration still exist? And I was like, what? You're reading the article I told you about. That's what's up. And then so he got a lot, like he got a good education on redlining and about the history of reparations and from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and between West Germany and the state of Israel in 1952. So there's these, so education is really, really important. If you feel like you don't know where to start or you're embarrassed to have these conversations around racism and suicide prevention and racism and mental health, start doing some reading, and it's not Black and brown people's job to educate us either. Like it's our job to read the books, to make the purchases, because
make an effort. Because
you like a Black or brown person, their interaction. We don't want our interactions to be one note with our brothers and sisters either. Like can you tell me more about your trauma? And like I'm trying to have brunch right now. Like I don't really feel like talking about my intergenerational trauma. So we have to be very careful about these things. And in speaking back to the resources as well, representation matters as well. So I sent out a few resources, and we'll have them on the live stream tonight for the show that we're doing in Sedona. But there's things like Fireflies Unite, Black Girl Therapy, things like that. So because not every resource needs to be counseling therapy. Those are good things, but the peer experience is so important, as you said, and as Rose said regarding NAMI, which I'm so grateful for the work of NAMI to normalize and say, hey, like there are other people out there who are going through these things. I'm not alone. I'm not, because that's how I felt when I was in suicidal crisis. I was like, I'm the only person in the world thinking and feeling like this. And it turned out, as I started to get well again, I was like, wow, there are many others that are going through difficult times in a similar way. And so that made me feel like I'm not less than, I'm not worthless. And then just speaking too real quickly about unwrapping that generational trauma. So in the ACEs, so I score a 5 on the ACEs, which is a predictor. Like I have had addiction issues, mild, but thank goodness, but I've had that. I've had brushes with suicide. I live with depression and anxiety. And then the more, again, the higher the score, you can start to develop cardiopulmonary issues and obesity and things like that. And so let's look at urban communities. And like, I grew up in an urban community as well. And the things you see and you witness, right? So only 2 years ago, I'm 36, 2 years ago, I only really owned the fact that I was physically and emotionally abused as a child. And so once we start to become aware of that, then we stop judging ourselves, because the behaviors and the coping mechanisms that we take on are from when we were little people and trying to fight for survival. And now those coping mechanisms don't serve us any longer. And so we get to put those away, and it'll take time, but we're doing the best we can. And I think most people are doing the best they can at any given point, given the information that they have. And the point is that we can do better, we can do better, we can do better, we can do healthier. And so the first step is the awareness around what we've been through. And then the next move is unzipping it. And then next move is reintegrating it back into our lives and using it as a tool, right? So that awareness is so important.
I'm kind of just reflecting a little bit, because I'm thinking about this idea of unwrapping, zipping, and really being there, because I think that's the hardest thing, is to be around somebody who's struggling and you don't know what to do to help them. And that's also the interesting thing about suicide, is that it's silent on both sides. It's silent on the victim, and it's silent on the victim's friends and family. You don't know until later. And then you try to, add up the data points and see, what did I miss? What could I have done differently? But just being able to have the conversation, somewhat like this show, giving the opportunity to talk about these things. And I've said this before, that one of the things that's really come out with this George Floyd thing is that suddenly I've admitted that I'm Black. It's a funny concept coming from someone who has been Black their whole life. But because of the way society has been, being Black has not been the in thing. And it's very difficult to move forward in a society as a person who is a marginalized individual. And long story short, I mean, this stuff is tough. It's tough to take. And we talk about resiliency and, what makes someone resilient. Well, it's not, when I started to realize that all of these struggles that I went through that were not struggles because of something that I could have done differently, it really reframed things in my mind about what I'm capable of.
Absolutely.
And I think that is the key thing. And so if you guys want these conversations to continue, you really have to support us with underwriting these shows. We are, as we talked about before, we're on our last show for now. We want to continue these as well. There's a gazillion topics. We want to get into healthcare because you can imagine there's a ton of conversations that we can have around healthcare, insurance, availability. You hear Karen talk about, in their biggest, worst time, the ability to get coverage, medical coverage, and especially in the mental health world. But we need your help. And we need you guys to really think about, is it your responsibility? Whose responsibility really is it? I have a video out there right now that says, if it's not you, then who? And I really want you to think about that statement for a little bit because, as we're searching for underwriters, I'm coming across a lot of you that are kind of in business as usual mode. And there's nothing wrong with business as usual mode, except that we're not in business usual mode as a country. And so that's the thing I want you to think about when I come to you or Camila comes to you and ask, if you would like to consider being an underwriter for this show, is consider what can you do differently that you haven't done? And it's not good enough to just, oh, well, I work for a big company that is pitching, we're going to throw out $10 billion at that problem. Well, you know what? That $10 billion is never going to get in my pocket. So we need your help. This is the one thing we're asking for.
I mean, I produce theater for a living to tackle the challenges that people face on an everyday basis. And so this is one of those conversations that we as people need to be having, and we need to be honest about it. We need to stop hiding from my African brothers and sisters. We need to have these conversations because they are real. I know that suicide has, touched my life in my family. So I know that the importance of this. And so when we're asking you to come and underwrite something, we're asking you to come and underwrite a life, and love a life enough to say, put your money where your mouth is and be honest about it. Because it's important. Someone's life depends on those resources. And if we're not allocating those resources to where they need to go, we have failed. So we need to fix that.
One of the things that we reflected on the last time we did this show was the fact that it's like folks who get to listen to the podcast or the live broadcast for that matter, they get to sit and listen in on a conversation that they might not get to have in their inner circle. It's either not safe, they don't know how to do it, everybody looks and feels and acts the same as them. So part of what we've been so thrilled about is being able to have these uncomfortable conversations and beginning to make them comfortable, to use Karen's words. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we'd like to continue this conversation, because we cannot shift and change if we stay in our comfort zone. We've got to step out of it, and we've got to reach across the aisle and walk across the street and introduce ourselves to the neighbor. Even if we get the door shut on our face, we've got to go ahead and say, okay, well, maybe not this time, but let me go give an opportunity to get to know somebody better. So we really do hope that you'll continue to support this series. And Karen, how can they get a hold of us if they're interested in learning more?
They can definitely email me at Karen@mossbrands.com, or you can give me a ring at 602-549-9508. I will definitely get back to you, and we have a pitch kit waiting to come your way. And so hopefully you are interested in being part of social change.
What a great opportunity for your family, your church, your business, your book group, whoever it is. These conversations we've had are excellent catalysts for change and for education, as well as really helping humanity become a little kinder to each other and changing the trajectory of how we treat our African American brothers and sisters.
Yeah, I do want to say thank you in advance to those that are going to write that check, because I know that there are people out there that want to write that check. And so I want to thank you in advance for writing that check and helping us to progress in these conversations, and not only as a person, but as a community of people, because again, we are responsible for each other, and that's what's important. It's not about me, it's about everybody else but me. And when we have that thought mentality, so many things can be so much better for so many people.
For sure. Rose, you had mentioned the resources. Karen mentioned that she would put them on the No Moss Brands website as well as LinkedIn. We'll do the same with Business RadioX. Thank you again for sending those resources. How can folks get involved with your organization, and how can we stay in touch with you professionally as well?
The NAMI Sedona website is just plain NAMI-Sedona.org. And the National NAMI organization has a wealth of resources as well. It's NAMI.org, NAMI.org. And if anybody is interested in getting more resources in Arizona alone, including crisis, suicide prevention, all that, that's just a mentalhealthresources.org. That's all it is, mentalhealthresources.org. It's a website.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you, Rose, again, for taking out your time to be here. I know you're extremely busy, and I know that you and Josh had a chance to meet already, but you all will see each other this evening as well.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
And thank you for hosting the Q&A. I think that's what your role is tonight.
Yeah, the Q&A tonight.
Right.
But I want Josh to just talk about the show tonight.
Yes, please. Let's tee that up.
Yeah, so we're going to tonight, well, this is a radio show, so check out this flyer and the handsome gentleman on it. It's called Kicking My Blue Jeans in the Butt, www.go2etc.org. And so this show is a bit about my life. Some of it, there's some embellishments. I play 15 characters. I sing in it a little bit. It's really kind of the tempestuous relationship I had with my dad while growing up, going into show business. So you'll hear a story about me being age 19 and being on the Maury Povich show on their Sexy Opposites, one of their Sexy Opposites episode. I was one of the opposites, in case you're wondering. So there's definitely some humor involved there. And then the very end, there is a bit of about my dad's suicide and how that affected me. And then I'll use that as a catalyst to then jump into sort of something that will feel a bit like a keynote. So you'll laugh, you'll be entertained for about 45, 50 minutes. And then I'll talk to the audience, whether it's streamed or in person. And it's about 20, 25 minutes. And we'll talk about prevention and what that looks like. And really from like a reaction to crisis, but also like upstream as well. So we'll talk about signs and symptoms and some of the nuance and language and why that's important. And so this is something that I've been doing for over 8 years. And I'm just really grateful to be doing it for the first time in Sedona and virtually as well. It should be really quite interesting. So that's tonight, September the 24th, tomorrow the 25th, and the 26th, Saturday, all at 7 p.m. AZT time. So that's
Pacific time for now.
Pacific time for now.
Tell everybody
3 hours behind the East Coast. And that's my story. I'm sticking
Josh,
to it.
you have a website, and are you on social media? Where, for those listening and may not get to participate this weekend, how can we stay in touch with you?
Sure. So I have a website, www.IamPossibleProject.com. M as in Mary, so IamPossibleProject.com. You can get in touch with me personally, Josh at IamPossibleProject.com. I'm all over social media. You can look up articles on me. I haven't made the police blotter yet, but everything else, you can find me. So
you can find him on Twitter, according to Camilla.
It's true. Joshua Rivedal. Yeah. And so Joshua, I was twitting all over the place.
Camilla, do you have another flyer as well?
I do have another flyer. So we next week we open with a new show called Stop Kiss by Diana Sun. It's a real important conversation that we need to be having. So that show opens October 2nd through the 10th. And so 2, 3, 4, 8, 9 at 7 p.m. and October 10th at 2 p.m. And there will be some great conversation of Q&A after that. And it's sponsored by PFLAG. And so we want people to come out and have these conversations.
Can you tell them what the show's about?
About life issues and things of that sort. And so this has to do with relationships between two women. And so it's a real important subject that we look at and not judge people based on how they live, based on gender, based on anything. Acceptance of people where they are in their life is so important. And so Stop Kiss by Diana Sun opens October 2nd. And so we want the community to come out and support it. It's going to be a live in-person event. We can only have 35 people in the theater, so due to COVID. So come out and support that. Thank you.
Karen Loomis, anything else to add before we close the show?
No, but I just thank all the listeners who have been phenomenal. We're probably at a good 200,000 in downloads, which is a phenomenal for a starting of a new show. And we couldn't thank you more for your support and for listening and all the feedback that we get from you guys on a regular basis. So keep that up, and you will hear from us again not too shortly. Who knows? Maybe we'll have another one in the next couple of weeks. So thank you very much.
We're hoping. Josh and Rose, thank you again both for being here with us. It's been a pleasure to get to know you, and I'm inspired by the work that both of you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Phoenix Business Radio X, broadcasting live from within the Max 6 Conscious Workspace studio. Some media leans left, some lean right. We lean business and the arts. Until next time, I'm Karen Nowicki. Thanks for listening.